For this week, we'll be talking about plyometrics. We will be going over the physiology of plyometric exercise, identifying the phases of the stretch shortening cycle, identifying the components of a plyometric training program, designing a safe and effective plyometric training program, and recommending proper equipment for use during plyometric exercise, and lastly, teaching correct execution of lower body plyometric exercises. Plyometric exercise refers to activities that enable a muscle to reach maximal force in the shortest possible time. Plyometric is a combination of Greek words that mean to increase measurement, where plyo equals more and metric equals measure. We can practically define plyometric exercise as a quick, powerful movement using a pre-stretch or counter movement that involves the stretch shortening cycle. The purpose of plyometric exercise is to increase the power of subsequent movements by using the natural elastic components of muscle and tendon and the stretch reflex. To apply plyometrics effectively within a training program, it is important to understand the mechanics and physiology of plyometric exercise, the principles of plyometric training program design, and methods of safely and effectively performing specific plyometric exercises. Functional movements and athletic success depends on the proper function of all active muscles and the speed at which these muscular forces are used. The term we use to define the force-speed relationship is power. The use of plyometric training can improve muscular force and power production. This increase in power is explained by the two proposed models, the mechanical and neurophysiological. In the mechanical model of plyometric exercise, elastic energy in the musculotendinous components is increased with a rapid stretch and then stored. When there is an immediate concentric muscle action following a rapid stretch, the stored elastic energy is released, increasing the total force production. Out of the mechanical model's element, the series elastic component is the workhorse of plyometric exercise. The series elastic component includes some muscular components, but it is the tendons that constitute the majority of the series elastic component. When the musculotendinous unit is stretched, such as an eccentric muscle action, the series elastic component acts as a spring and is lengthened. As the muscle lengthens, elastic energy is stored. If the muscle begins a concentric action immediately after the eccentric action, that stored energy is released, allowing the series elastic component to contribute to the total force production by naturally returning the muscles and tendons to their unstretched configuration. If there isn't a concentric muscle action immediately occurring after an eccentric muscle action, or if the eccentric phase is too long or requires too great of a motion, the stored energy dissipates and is lost as heat. Here is the mechanical model of skeletal muscle function on plyometric exercise. The contractile component consists of actin, myosin, and cross bridges, which is the primary source of muscle force during concentric muscle action. The parallel elastic component consists of epimysium, perimysium, endomysium, and the sarcolemma, which exerts a passive force with unstimulated muscle stretch. The neurophysiological model involves potentiation of the concentric muscle action by use of the stretch reflex. Potentiation is the change in the force velocity characteristics of the muscle's contractile components caused by stretch. The stretch reflex is the body's involuntary response to an external stimulus that stretches the muscles. The most well-known stretch reflex test is the knee tendon tap that you get at the doctor's. The stretch reflex mainly involves muscle spindles, which provide mechanosensory information about changes in muscle fiber length and rate of change of length. The muscle spindles are innervated by gamma motor neurons, so when a quick stretch is detected, muscular activity reflexively increases. During plyometric exercises, the muscle spindles are stimulated by a rapid stretch, causing a reflexive muscle action. This stretch reflex sends inputs to the spinal cord via type 1A nerve fibers. After synapsing with the alpha motor neurons in the spinal cord, impulses travel to the agonist extrafusal fibers, causing a reflex of muscle action. Ultimately, this increases the force the muscle produces. Similar to the mechanical model, if a concentric muscle action does not immediately follow a stretch, the eccentric phase is too long, or too great of a motion, the potentiating ability of the stretch reflex is negated. Both the mechanical and neurophysiological models contribute to the increased force production. However, it is unsure how much each model contributes to, though, or which contributes more. The stretch shortening cycle employs energy storage capabilities of the series elastic component and stimulation of the stretch reflex to facilitate a maximal increase in muscle recruitment over a minimal amount of time. The stretch shortening cycle involves three different phases. One thing though is that not all of the events occur within the given phase. Some of the events may last longer or may require less time than allowed in the given phase. Here are the three different phases of the stretch shortening cycle, where phase 1 is the eccentric phase, phase 2 is the amortization phase, and the third and final phase is the concentric phase. You can also see the action during each phase and what is happening physiologically. Phase 1 is the eccentric phase, which involves preloading the agonist muscle groups such as the quadriceps. During this phase, the series elastic component stores elastic energy and the muscle spindles are stimulated. When the muscle spindles are stretched, they send a signal to the ventral root of the spinal cord via the type 1A afferent nerve fibers. Let's use the long jump as an example for the stretch shortening cycle in the different phases. As you can see, the eccentric phase during long jump begins at touchdown of the foot to the bottom of the movement ends. Phase 2 is the time between the eccentric and concentric phases and is referred to as the amortization or transition phase. This is the time from the end of the eccentric phase to the initiation of the concentric muscle action. One thing to note is that there is a delay between the eccentric and concentric muscle actions, where a type 1A afferent nerve synapse with the alpha motor neurons in the ventral root of the spinal cord. The alpha motor neuron sends a signal to the agonist muscle group, such as the quadriceps. The second phase of the stretch shortening cycle is probably the most crucial in allowing greater power production. If the amortization phase lasts too long, the stored energy during the eccentric phase dissipates as heat, and the stretch reflex will not increase muscular activity during the concentric muscle action. Looking at the long jump example, the amortization phase is the transition from eccentric to concentric phases. It is quick and without movement. If movement begins again, the amortization phase will end. The last phase of the stretch shortening cycle is the concentric phase, or phase 3, which is the body's response to the eccentric and amortization phases. The energy stored in the series elastic component during the eccentric phase is used to increase the force production or will dissipate as heat. This stored elastic energy increases the force produced during the concentric phase beyond that of an isolated concentric muscle action. Going back to the long jumper, the concentric phase follows the amortization phase and composes the entire push-off time until the athlete's foot leaves the surface. The rate of muscular tendinous stretch is vital to plyometric exercise, as a high stretch rate results in greater muscle recruitment and activity during the stretch shortening cycle concentric phase. This is best illustrated by the three different vertical jump tests: the static squat jump, the counter movement jump, and the approach jump. So out of these three vertical jump tests, which jump produces the lowest value and the highest value? The static squat jump results in the lowest jump height. This requires the athlete to get in a squatting position followed by a jump up. This jump does not use stored elastic energy and is too slow to allow potentiation from the stretch reflex because there is essentially no eccentric phase. When we look at the counter movement jump, this uses a rapid eccentric muscle action, which is followed immediately by a rapid concentric muscle action. The rapid eccentric action allows the athlete to store and use elastic energy in the stretch muscular tendinous unit and stimulates the stretch reflex, thereby potentiating muscle activity. The approach jump results in the highest vertical jump out of the three tests. This jump uses an even quicker, more forceful eccentric phase than the counter movement jump. This allows an increased rate of stretch and thus a further increase in vertical jump height. When designing a plyometric exercise training program, it is similar to resistance and aerobic prescriptions. There is very little research for optimal program variables for designing plyometric exercise programs. So when prescribing plyometric exercise, you need to rely on the available research, practical experience, and the guidelines similar to designing a resistance training program. As always, an appropriate needs analysis should be conducted for the athlete by evaluating his or her sport, position, and training status, since each sport and position have their own unique requirements. By understanding each sport individual requirements, the positions within the sport, and the needs of each athlete, the strength and conditioning professional can design a safe, effective plyometric training program. Lower body plyometrics are appropriate for almost any athlete and any sport. Most of the sports require athletes to produce a maximal amount of muscular force in a short amount of time, either horizontally, vertically, or laterally. There is a wide variety of lower body drills with various intensity levels and directional movements. Some types of lower body plyometric drills include jumps in place, standing jumps, multiple hops and jumps, bounds, box drills, and depth jumps. You can see here in the table to the right the rationale for each different lower body plyometric drill. When we look at upper body plyometrics, this is not used as often compared to lower body plyometrics. However, some sports require rapid, powerful upper body movements, such as baseball, softball, tennis, and throws in track and field. Some plyometric upper body drills include medicine ball throws, catches, and several types of push-ups. We can also perform trunk plyometrics. However, it is generally difficult to perform true plyometric drills that directly target the trunk musculature because all the requisite plyometric elements may not be present. Exercises for the trunk may be performed plyometrically provided that movement modifications are made. Specifically, the exercise movements must be shorter and quicker to allow stimulation and use of the stretch reflex. The relatively large range of motion and the time needed to complete the movement do not permit reflex of potentiation of the abdominal muscles. So we have to decrease the range of motion and time to allow the abdominal muscles to be potentiating and making the exercise more like a plyometric exercise. Plyometric intensity is the amount of stress placed on the muscles, connective tissues, and joints. The amount of stress will be based on the drill that you prescribe. For instance, skipping is a low-intensity plyometric drill, while depth jumps are a high-intensity drill and places a lot of stress on the muscles and joints. Other factors such as points of contact, speed, height of the drill, and body weight will also affect the intensity of lower body plyometric drills. As you can see on the table to the right, you can see the different factors and the effect. In general, as intensity increases, volume should decrease. Remember, frequency is the number of plyometric training sessions per week and typically ranges from 1 to 3, depending on the sport and the season, as well as the athlete's training experience. However, there is no optimal frequency for training plyometrically. It is suggested that instead of relying on frequency, you should rely more on recovery time between plyometric training sessions. So a general rule of thumb is at least 48 to 72 hours between plyometric sessions, as this gives enough recovery time for the athlete. This will give the athlete about 2 to 3 plyometric training sessions per week. Since plyometric drills involve maximal effort to improve anaerobic power, complete and adequate recovery time is necessary. Recovery for depth jumps may consist of 5 to 10 seconds of rest between repetitions and 2 to 3 minutes between sets. So the work to rest ratio would be 1 to 5 or up to 1 to 10. The work to rest ratio will be dependent on the volume and the type of drill. One thing to note is that drills should not be thought of as cardiorespiratory conditioning exercises, but as power training. If you want the athlete to improve their cardiorespiratory fitness level, you will have them follow the anaerobic and aerobic training program. Lastly, drills for a given body area should not be performed 2 days in a row. If you are doing lower body plyometrics on Monday, you need to avoid performing drills on Tuesday. The earliest you can perform lower body plyometric drills would be on Wednesday then. Plyometric volume is typically expressed as the number of repetitions and sets performed during a given training session. Lower body plyometric volume is normally given as the number of foot contacts, such as each time a foot or the feet together contact the surface during a workout. But it also may be expressed as distance, as with plyometric bounding. For upper body plyometric volume, this is typically expressed as the number of throws or catches per workout. You can see on the table to the right the recommended lower body volumes depending on the athlete's training status. There is no optimal plyometric training program length. However, most programs range from 6 to 10 weeks. One thing though is that vertical jump height improves as quickly as 4 weeks after the start of a plyometric training program. When prescribing plyometric training, it should be similar to both resistance and aerobic training. Since plyometrics is a form of resistance training, more specifically like power training, it should follow the principles of progressive overload. Progressive overload is the systematic increase in training frequency, volume, and intensity in various combinations. The sport, training phase, and design of the strength and conditioning program determine the training schedule and method of progressive overload. For example, an off-season plyometric program for a football player should start with a low to moderate volume of low-intensity plyometrics, and then progress to low to moderate volumes of moderate intensity, and then to low to moderate volumes of moderate to high intensity. When it comes to a plyometric exercise training session, it should begin with a general warm-up, stretching, and then a specific warm-up. The specific warm-up for plyometric training should consist of low-intensity dynamic movements. You can see on the table to the right the different warm-up drills and the explanation for each of those drills. For example, the marching drill mimics running movements, emphasizes posture and movement technique, and enhances proper lower body movements for running. Nowadays, it is becoming more common for younger and older individuals to want to augment their training programs for their sport by incorporating plyometric exercise. When plyometric exercises are applied appropriately for these age ranges, they can experience the same positive outcomes as other age groups with minimal risk of injury. Prepubescent and adolescent children may benefit from training with plyometric and plyometric-like exercises. There is no set universal age at which people are physically able to begin participating in a plyometric training program. However, an analysis of the body's development provides some insight into the issue. Because the epiphyseal plates of the bones of prepubescent children have yet to close, if they perform depth jumps or other high-intensity lower body drills, they may cause the plates to close prematurely, resulting in limb length discrepancies. This could be due to the high-intensity activity or possible injury from performing plyometrics. In addition, it is important that boys and girls have the emotional maturity to accept and follow directions. The primary goal of plyometric exercise programs for children should be used to develop neuromuscular control and anaerobic skills that will carry over to safer participation in sports and athletics. It is very important that plyometric exercise programs for children gradually progress from simple to more complex drills and really just focus on the technique. When it comes to recovery, there should be a minimum of 2 or 3 days between training sessions. Under proper supervision and with an appropriate program, prepubescent and adolescent children may perform plyometric exercises. Depth jumps and high-intensity lower body plyometrics are contraindicated for this population. Master athletes are individuals who are aged 35 or above. When you are developing a plyometric training program for a master's athlete, you should consider if there are any pre-existing orthopedic conditions, such as osteoarthritis or any sort of surgical joint intervention or joint degeneration. If they have a pre-existing condition, you should proceed with great caution and a more careful use of plyometric exercise. After evaluating the master athlete's physical condition and assuming they are relatively healthy, the plyometric program should include no more than 5 low to moderate intensity exercises. The volume should be lower, that is, having fewer total foot contacts than a standard plyometric training program, and the recovery time between workouts should be 3 or 4 days. Since plyometric exercise is only a portion of an athlete's overall training program, you need to consider the effects of plyometric exercise and resistance training together. A combination of plyometrics and resistance training during a training cycle should be structured to allow maximal efficiency and physical improvement. One thing is that if you have the athlete perform lower body resistance training, you should have them perform upper body plyometrics. And if you have the athlete perform upper body resistance training, they should perform lower body plyometrics. Another thing is that performing heavy resistance training and plyometrics on the same day should be avoided. Some advanced athletes may benefit from complex training though. Complex training is a combination of high-intensity resistance training followed by plyometrics. For example, you can have an athlete perform heavy back squat, then following that set, perform a set of jump squats. However, if the athlete performs complex training, you need to provide adequate recovery time. You can also combine traditional resistance exercise with plyometric movements to further increase muscular power. For instance, you can have the athlete perform a squat jump with 30% 1RM as an external resistance further increases performance. This is an advanced form of complex training that is appropriate only for athletes who have previously participated in a high-intensity plyometric training program. Most of the sports will have an anaerobic and aerobic component to the training program. Aerobic exercise may have a negative effect on power production, so it's advisable to perform plyometric exercise before aerobic endurance training. To reduce the risk of injury and facilitate the performance of plyometric exercises, the athlete must understand proper plyometric technique and possess a sufficient base of strength, speed, and balance. So before adding any drill to an athlete's plyometric program, you should demonstrate proper technique to the athlete in order to maximize the drill's effectiveness and minimize the risk of injury. For lower body plyometrics, proper landing technique is essential, particularly for depth jumps.
If the center of gravity is offset from the base of support, performance is hindered and injury may occur. The shoulder should be over the knees and the knees over the toes during the landing, which the jumper accomplishes through flexion of the ankles, knees, and the hips. Here we can see on the figure to the right the proper plyometric landing position. If you look from the side view, the shoulders should be in line with the knees, which helps to place the center of gravity over the body's base of support. When you are looking from the frontal view, the knees should be over the toes. If there is an excessive inward movement of the knees, which is termed dynamic valgus, this increases the athlete's risk of lower extremity injury, particularly at the knee. The most common injury at the knee is an ACL injury, which is more prone to happen in women due to their anatomical structure, such as the acute angle, along with other factors. A pre-training evaluation of the athlete before starting a plyometric training program should consider the athlete's level of strength. For lower body plyometrics, it is usually recommended the athlete's 1RM squat be at least 1.5 times his or her body weight. However, not all athletes have that strength, so it is more important to consider the technique. A less obvious lower body plyometric requirement is balance. Balance is the maintenance of a position without movement for a given period of time. There are some lower body plyometric drills that require the athlete to move in non-traditional patterns such as double leg, zigzag hop, and backward skip, or on a single leg such as a single leg hop, which requires a solid, stable base of support. There are 3 balance tests which you can see on the table to the right, which are listed in order of difficulty. Each test position must be held for 30 seconds, and also the test should be performed on the same surface used for the drills. An athlete beginning plyometric training for the first time must stand on one leg for 30 seconds without falling. An experienced athlete beginning an advanced plyometric training program must maintain a single leg half squat for 30 seconds without falling. Something also to consider when it comes to plyometrics is the athlete's body weight. Athletes who weigh more than 220 pounds may be at an increased risk for injury when performing plyometric exercises. The greater weight increases the compressive force on joints during the exercises, thereby predisposing these joints to injury. So if an athlete weighs over 220 pounds, they should avoid high volume, high intensity plyometric exercises and depth jumps from heights greater than 18 inches. It is important to consider an athlete's joint structure and history of injury before starting a plyometric training program as well.
Not only do we consider the athlete's fitness and health, the area and equipment used for plyometric drills may significantly affect their safety. To prevent injuries, the landing surface used for lower body plyometrics must possess sufficient shock-absorbing properties. A grass field, suspended floor, or rubber mat is a good surface choice. Surfaces such as concrete, tile, and hardwood are not recommended since they lack effective shock-absorbing properties. Excessively thick exercise mats that are 6 inches or more in thickness may extend the amortization phase and thus not allow efficient use of the stretch reflex. Mini trampolines are typically used for beginning plyometric and balance training and rehabilitation. These are not effective for plyometric training of uninjured athletes because the amortization phase is extended while the athlete is in contact with the elastic surface. The training area for the athlete is also important as the amount of space needed depends on the drill. Most bounding and running drills require at least 30 meters or 33 yards of straightaway. There are some drills that may require a straightaway of 100 meters. For most standing jumps, box jumps, and depth jumps, only a minimal surface area is needed, but the ceiling height must be 3 to 4 meters in order to be adequate.
The equipment that is utilized for plyometric training exercise is important. The boxes used for box jumps and depth jumps must be sturdy and should have a non-slip top. Boxes should range in height from 6 to 42 inches and should have landing surfaces of at least 18 by 24 inches. The box should be constructed of sturdy wood or heavy gauge metal. Also, you may use a foam plyometric box. A foam plyo box will help reduce scraping shins if the athlete misses and decreases the forces on the joints. However, just be aware that since the foam plyo boxes have a vinyl covering, spilling water on it or excessive sweat can cause it to be slippery and may cause an injury to the athlete. Proper footwear is also important when performing plyometric exercise. Athletes should wear shoes with good ankle and foot support, good lateral stability, and a wide, non-slip sole. Shoes with a narrow sole and poor upper support, such as running shoes, may cause ankle problems, especially with lateral movements. Also, shoes with insufficient foot support may lead to arch or lower leg injuries or both, while footwear without enough cushioning might lead to damage of more proximal joints such as the knees or hips. So we just went over some safety considerations for plyometric exercise such as equipment, landing surface, footwear, strength, balance, and physical characteristics. The last safety consideration is supervising, where you want to closely monitor athletes to ensure proper technique. The last thing we'll talk about is depth jumping. There is a limit to the maximum height at which a depth jump can be effectively and safely performed. A height of 48 inches would provide a significant overload on the muscles, but the resistance may be too great for many athletes to overcome while maintaining proper technique. Jumping from this height increases the chance of injury, and also the amount of force to be overcome is so great that the amortization phase is extended, and thus the purpose of the exercise is defeated. The recommended height for depth jump ranges from 16 to 48 inches, with 30 to 32 inches being the norm. Depth jump box height for athletes who weigh over 220 pounds should be 18 inches or less. In summary, the major goal of plyometric training is to rapidly apply force to provide an overload to the agonist muscles. Also, research has yet to determine whether mechanical or neurophysiological adaptations account for this improvement. Furthermore, plyometrics should be considered part of an overall program that includes strength, speed, aerobic, and flexibility training, along with proper nutrition. Lastly, after the athlete has begun a proper strength and conditioning program, plyometric training may be used to further develop power.